From the Arizona Daily Star and Tucson.com, this is the Wildcast.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. Justin Spears here with the man, Michael Lev. We're talking all things Arizona Wildcats football. We'll be answering your podcast questions. Thanks to those who contributed to the mailbag. We'll be tapping into those at the end of this podcast. As always, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Wildcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think about the podcast. We always have a good time doing these twice a week. Of course, Ryan Finley, sports editor of the Star, will be joining us later on to preview Arizona's upcoming game against the Washington State Cougars. 2 games at home, Lev. Got Wazoo, and then you got Arizona State coming up. But, man, what happened this past Saturday was memorable. I will never forget that game at the Rose Bowl. Arizona upsetting the number 12 UCLA Bruins 34-28. However, Lev, while that win was magical and Arizona fans stayed up until 3 a.m., 4 a.m., partying all night long, celebrating the win.
I mean, we stayed up too, but
yeah,
we weren't partying.
We weren't partying. We were working and kind of getting our way through the night. But the win came at a price, Lev, and left tackle Jordan Morgan is out for the season with a leg injury he suffered against the Bruins. Big loss for the Wildcats.
Yeah, they won the battle and maybe lost the war. Really tough injury news on all fronts. Difficult for the team. Really difficult for Jordan Morgan, who, was having a breakout season. One of the top graded tackles in the country. He had fulfilled his promise. Like last year was tough for him. He had that high ankle sprain suffered in training camp and was just never really right all year. This year he's been absolutely stellar, far and away the best lineman. He's got all these, the size and athleticism that NFL teams want. I think he'd put himself in a position where after the season he could have declared for the draft and been Arizona's first offensive lineman drafted since Eben Britton. Now it looks like it's probably an ACL based on the type, our experience watching these types of injuries. It was a non-contact situation where his leg just buckled and he's grabbing his knee. That's, 6 to 9 month rehab. Like, what do you do if you're Jordan Morgan in his camp? Like, do you go pro? Does this mean you got to come back for another year because you're not going to be able to work out for teams and show them what you've got? Just really bad timing. Not that there's ever good timing for a situation like this, but I just feel awful for him because I know how much work he's put into this, and he was really at the top of his game.
The story of Jordan Morgan goes back to Marana High School, where he was just this kind of budding star that people had heard about him, right? I had heard, oh man, Arizona's shown interest in this guy. I believe NAU was also recruiting Jordan Morgan, but he plays at Marana High School and he doesn't have social media. Like, I think he just created an Instagram account like a few years ago, but he doesn't have a Twitter handle, doesn't have really much social media, and he's a very low-key guy. And so he flew under the radar when it came to his recruitment. And then Arizona offered him. He commits to Arizona. And then USC gets word about this guy, Jordan Morgan. And then you have guys like Clay Helton attending games at Marana High School to recruit this guy. Because you look at him, and he was just dripping with potential. Because he is 6'5". At that time, I believe he was like 260 pounds. But you see the framework for what could be an elite-level offensive lineman. And fortunately, Arizona was able to kind of fend off USC and were able to get them in their program. And then he goes through, was it the COVID year? And then goes through the coaching change. He has different position coaches. But when it's all said and done, Jordan Morgan positioned himself to add weight, put muscle on his body, and was a pretty decent offensive lineman. Like, when you look at his film this year, I mean, does his film scream, oh, I'm going to start at the NFL right away? But again, it's all about potential. And you look at Jordan Morgan now, and he's evolved himself from potential as a D1 college player. Now that he's fulfilled that potential, now he's got potential to be a solid NFL player.
Yeah, I would say a lot of times, especially when it comes to pass blocking, that the less you notice an offensive tackle, the better they're probably performing. So, the fact that we weren't sitting here every week talking about, oh my God, Jordan Morgan did such a great job, it's because he was doing his job.
Yeah.
He's keeping pass rushers at bay. A lot of the pressures come from the other side, or it's come from the interior. And, Sam Lange, the veteran, is now going to step in and be the starting left tackle. It's definitely a drop-off. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. Jordan was far and away Arizona's best offensive lineman this season. Sam's got a tough job, and it's, he's got experience, though. He's played 4 positions this year, both guard spots, as well as right tackle and left tackle, in the UCLA game after Jordan Morgan went out. So he can lean on that. And what it really does, too, it hurts Arizona's depth, of course. I mean, there's only so many viable offensive linemen on the roster. And Jed was mentioning Joseph Bourgeon as a possibility, Jacob Reese. These guys have not played. I mean, Joe Bourgeon might have gotten in on field goal this last game because Jordan was out. He talked about maybe Jonah Sava-Inaya moving over there in an emergency situation. I guess I could see Josh Donovan. Now you hope Sam Lange is able to stay healthy and just kind of hold the fort.
Yeah.
Because there's, we've seen Jaden Delora's wizardry back there in the pocket, out of the pocket, running around, making plays, doing crazy stuff. I mean, Chip Kelly after the game, basically like, I've never seen anything like that. That was the biggest factor in the game. That's the biggest reason we lost. But you can't rely on that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you'd much prefer that Jaden Delora have clean pockets, and Washington State has a really good pass rush, and that's going to be a huge focal point heading into this next game.
Does this mean that Jordan Morgan's coming back next season for Arizona? Because we have every reason to believe that he was out of here. And, I mean, I wrote in my story last week when we went to go see Elijah Payne play for Sierra Canyon. And I said Elijah Payne could come in and compete for a starting spot because Jordan Morgan might go to the NFL. We have every reason to believe he's going to the NFL. And then you got Peyton Fears at right tackle running out of eligibility. So Arizona, we thought that they were going to lose both tackles. Now with this Jordan Morgan situation, because you got to think about rehab, preparing for the NFL draft. And again, like I said, it's not like his film just jumps out to you. And if he were to work out for teams, then great. His potential would go up even more. But I feel like he's not really going to get, as you said before this podcast, Lev, the benefit of the doubt because he wasn't this 5-star offensive lineman being recruited. When you think about some of the best offensive tackles, I'm sure in the Pac-12, I'm sure you can name a couple more that you take over Jordan Morgan. But I don't know, man. I think that this might be a blessing in disguise for the Wildcats because then they can have an anchor at that left tackle spot if Jordan Morgan decides to come back.
Yeah, I mean, for Arizona, if he were to come back, I mean, that would be amazing.
Huge building block.
Because he's really good. And we've seen situations like this elsewhere around the country where something like this happens with this kind of timing and the player ends up coming back. He would be a 5th-year player next year. Wouldn't be unprecedented. We'll have to see. I'm sure that that's something that's being discussed right now in the Morgan household or with Jordan and Brendan Carroll and getting feedback from the scouting community and all that kind of stuff. Now he's got a tough decision to make. I mean, it was already maybe a difficult decision, maybe not. Now it's just really hard because there's just so many more variables at play here. And I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm not sure there is one.
Because you could come back, but also risk another injury, and then you're just hurting yourself even more.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but you also can't take the field with that kind of mentality either. We've seen guys sit out almost like entire seasons. We've seen guys sit out bowl games to preserve their health, but fluke things happen to guys. That dude, remember that? God, I can't think of his name. Not Hutchinson, but the other Michigan defensive end last year, going into the draft. Remember, he got hurt during his pro day workout, and ended up falling into I think the second round to the Ravens.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name right now, but these.
I keep wanting to say Karlaftis, but it's not him.
No.
It's not George
These
Karlaftis.
things happen, and yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's really tough. If it is an ACL, like I said, that's a 6 to 9 month injury probably. So you could be back for next season, but you can't work out for teams. Your draft stock is going to fall because of that.
On a more positive note, Lev, I know Arizona fans are probably dreading listening to this, but Arizona did beat UCLA. Big win for the program. And Lev, we said it, that if Arizona were to win, they'd have to trade points with UCLA. And they did just that. They got off to a great start, led 14-0, and then UCLA came back, fought their way back into the game, and it was looking like maybe the tide was going to turn for the Bruins. And it kind of felt a little bit like the San Diego State game, where some things happened and it seemed like all the momentum was shifting towards the other side. And it's like, oh, here's the Avalanche. How's Arizona going to be able to get out of it? But they were able to exchange blows, and we said that if in order for them to have a chance to beat UCLA, they're going to have a takeaway or two. Defense,
got one?
Yeah, they did, but defense,
block field goals kind of like that.
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stop.
I would say that.
It's a stop.
But that's what I'm saying. It's all about the stops on fourth down. And Arizona's defense and Johnny Nansen, big shout out to them.
Those are like turnovers. I mean, you get the ball back, right? After a fourth down stop. The other team doesn't. And we've talked about it all year long that it's not about stopping the opponent every time. It's about getting enough stops to win the game. That's how a lot of these Pac-12 games are. I mean, Washington and Oregon Dan Lanning made a crazy decision to go for it with his quarterback on the sideline, 4th and 1 from their own 35 in a tie game with about 90 seconds left. Washington got that stop. And, they were then able to hold on and win kick a field goal and hold on to win the game. The no points for UCLA at the end of the first half, right? Even though they were kind of in field goal range, that fumble was upheld. By the way, they changed it from Keon Barrs forcing the fumble to Gunnar Maldonado forcing the fumble. Keon tackled DTR, but the ball actually hit Gunnar as he was coming down, so he got credit for that. Hunter Echols had the recovery, so they didn't score there. They didn't score in the opening drive of the second half either, right? So the middle eight, which is all the rage now. Those are advantageous plays for Arizona in that regard. And then the last two series, 4th and 6, incomplete pass, pressure from Jalen Harris, and then pressure from Hunter Echols kind of forced DTR to throw on the run and, couldn't make his most accurate pass in the back of the end zone to Bobo, who got a hand on it. It looked to me, I watched it a bunch of times, like he would have landed out of bounds had he caught it. I can't imagine what the defensive backs were thinking as this was all unfolding, because I don't know, they weren't like sprinting super hard in that direction. Like I'm not sure they knew where Bobo was.
Yeah,
along the back line there.
I think I heard you say, "Oh my gosh!"
No, like you could see it. You could see it kind of, almost happening, but it didn't. And they were able to pull out, the biggest win of the Jed Fish era by far.
Yeah.
Not even close. You could maybe cite the Cal game last year because it ended the losing streak, but I mean that Cal team was missing like a third of its players because of COVID. The game was on Pac-12 networks. I believe the first 6 Pac-12 games this year were on Pac-12.
Yeah.
And although that game was super late on the East Coast, it was on Fox, Big Fox. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people were watching.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were like, whoa, this Jaden DeLora guy, look at the way he plays. And I'm like, we see it every week. It's like, it's nothing new for us, but it was kind of a, hey, it was a national spotlight moment for the Wildcats program. And Jed said today that nothing really changes, but it definitely gives you a nice boost in terms of your profile and just how much, important people like recruits are aware of your program.
Yeah. Well, and Lev, us in the media, we're obviously not supposed to show bias, right? As responsible and ethical journalists, you have to be able to not show any bias with the team that you cover. However, I am very happy for players. And the guys, especially because
I think we're allowed to be that way.
That for the players, right? And when we get critical, it's warranted, right? Or we can say, oh, a player is playing bad, and we can actually look at the film and it shows that the player is playing bad. We could be critical of coaches, but for players, I think about all the things that these guys have been through over the last few years. I'm mostly happy. Okay, so there's two reasons why I'm happy for the group of players on Arizona's team. I'm happy for the SoCal kids, the young players like T-Mac, like Tai Uiagalelei, Jacob Manu, who we weren't expected to play a lot this season, and he's over here making plays in the Rose Bowl. I mean, as a kid from SoCal, that's got to be a really cool feeling to be a part of that. And all of these young SoCal players who had a hand in Arizona's win over UCLA, I'm happy for them because they had a lot of supporters there watching them, and they were able to kind of show out and ball out for the people who've supported them their entire lives in that city. And then the upperclassmen, the Michael Wileys, the Jalen Harrises, the Jordan Morgans, guys who have been here since pretty much the start of the Kevin Sumlin era, and what they've had to endure over the last few years, and then the coaching change, going 1-11 last year, but still, I know it's a cliche, and it all started with the Philadelphia 76ers, trust the process. Jedfish talks about it all the time, but they did trust the process, and now they're kind of able to enjoy moments like this. And moments like Saturday, beating UCLA at the Rose Bowl when they're a highly ranked team, I think those guys who stuck it out kind of look back and say, you know what, it was all worth it in the end.
Yeah, cleaning up a couple things here. David Ojabo was the defensive end from Michigan who
That's who it was.
Tore his Achilles during their pro day. And speaking of Tai, Noah Eagle called the game for Fox, son of Ian Eagle. There are certain times when Noah really sounds like his dad. Certain calls, especially like the call at the end of the game, you can tell that they're related. But he had a good line, Tai with the tackle.
Oh, I like that.
So that was good. One more thing about that game. I know we got our mailbag here coming up. Again, very liberal use of rotation on the defensive line. And I really think it paid benefits or paid dividends at the end of the game. Jalen Harris played his fewest snaps of the entire season in that game. And probably some of that had to do with he got poked in the eye at the end, so he might have had a couple more. But he's played 46 snaps, and he's the one who got pressure on the 4th and 6 play, on the next to last possession for UCLA. Kind of forced a high and hurried throw to the sideline. Okay? Last play of the game, Hunter Echols' get-off was unbelievable on that play, and he immediately got pressure, forced DTR out of the pocket. Does that happen if those guys have played 70 snaps up to that point? Echols played 51 in that game. He's averaged 51 the last 3 games. In the previous 6, he'd averaged 61. Those 10 snaps that you get to rest makes a huge difference, and they have just fully committed to this finally, and it's the way to go. It's you have to be able to affect the opposing quarterback without blitzing, and you need to have a deep defensive line rotation to do that.
That one play that you're referring to where he got pressure on DTR was 3rd and 6, you said, or 4th and 6?
Jalen?
Yes.
4th and 6. The last play. Yeah, the last play of the previous drive.
If Johnny Nanson's like maybe changing up his lineups depending on the distance, right? All right, hey, it's 6-7 yards. We know that they're probably going to pass it. Let's get bigger guys in there.
Well, no, I think he had the dollar package in there a lot. But I don't know if he's even paying that much attention to that because Isaiah Ward, the freshman who hadn't played before all season, he was in there on the last play of the game wearing number 91, even though his number's 90, and wearing number 91 with no name on the back. But he was in there on the last play of the game, the guy who hadn't played the entire season. They did use that dollar package a bunch in the game. Chip Kelly ran against it a few times, so that's kind of an interesting little chess match that's going to be played out here. And Washington State plays a version of the air raid. So we might see a lot of that dollar package depending on the down and distance situations in the game on Saturday.
All right, Lev, home stretch, mailbag time.
Yeah.
Starting off with Jonathan Blank. Who of the players that are thought to enter the draft has an outside shot of staying, i.e. Jordan Morgan with his injury? Would he still enter the draft like Gronk did, CRW, etc.? Thank you. No, thank you, Jonathan Blank, for submitting a question and, as always, supporting the Wildcast. Gronk's an different story because Gronk was one of the best tight ends in college football. Even not playing that 2009 season, coming out of that draft, he was still the second or third tight end selected. So Jordan Morgan is a different case than Rob Gronkowski, but I like Jordan Morgan to come back. But outside of that, I could see Christian Roland Wallace maybe declaring.
Gronk missed the whole season, right? In 2009,
back injury.
Yeah. Christian Roland Wallace is definitely one that jumps out to me. I think he was in the same class as Jordan Morgan, so he could come back for a fifth year next year if he wanted to. He's had a really good year. I'm not sure how much better he's going to get. This is probably a prime opportunity for him to go, but he's also just kind of a different kid. He's really quiet. He loves Arizona. He could have transferred at any point, and he decided to stick around. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't think there's really anybody else who's in that class where they're good enough to go before their eligibility has expired and legitimately have a chance to get picked.
I would say maybe if they want to save tread on the tires, DJ Williams. Older guys.
Okay, but you know how many running backs there are?
I know.
Who are really good.
Yeah.
Who don't get picked at all or end up falling to the 6th or 7th round. He does not have the tape.
No.
To do that.
But he has some games at Florida State, Auburn. He can maybe piece together something.
It's supply and demand. It's supply and demand. The supply of running backs exceeds the demand for running backs. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't think he'd be picked.
All right. Next one up. AZ Cats Go. Out of the starters on this year's team, how many do you project back on both sides of the ball? Man, Arizona beats UCLA and people are already talking about next season.
Okay. So, I think on the offensive line, I would have said they would lose 3 if you're including Josh Donovan as a starter, part-time starter.
Jacob Cowing.
Jacob Cowing, I think, is going to go. Peyton Fears is out of eligibility. Jordan Morgan, we don't know. So that's somewhere in the 8 range on offense. On defense, both defensive ends are out of eligibility. Jerry Roberts is out of eligibility. Christian Young is out of eligibility. So that's 4 right there. We talked about Ciro. Not sure what he's going to do. So probably about 6, maybe 7 on defense. So
over half.
Pretty good. You never know who's going to transfer, of course. But a good core, and they're building. They're building up the roster and the depth, and that to me is the critical thing. I would not be surprised at all if they went pretty heavily in the portal at the linebacker position because they need some bodies there. They need some guys who can step in and play that middle linebacker position. And I don't think you want Jacob Manu playing 80 snaps a game either.
No.
He's an undersized guy, super aggressive, super physical. It would be better if he could share that job with somebody else.
Winston Dan asked, does the O-line have the depth to finish out the season? Also, great to see the special teams get in the mix. For too long, they've only had negative impacts in games. Well, special teams has really stepped up over the last couple of years, starting with Kyle Ostendorp last year. He was the team's MVP for a team that went 1-11, and he's been now back this year. Just kind of doing his job, right? We don't talk about how.
Yeah, I don't think he's had a great year, but he had a really good game against UCLA.
Yeah,
he had 3 punts. They were 2 fair caught inside the 20 and 1 down at the 1 yard line.
Yeah.
So he's been a little bit up and down. Tyler Loop has been very reliable inside 40 yards. He's about 50% beyond 40 yards. Kickoffs have been pretty good. I'd say the only area I'm disappointed in special teams is the return game. Haven't broken one really. They had that key fumble at Utah. Every time the ball is kicked outside of the goal line, they take it back out on kickoff, and you don't have to do that. And they oftentimes don't make it to the 25. So, that's one of those things. I'd personally like to see Speedy Luke on kickoff return. I'm not sure why they haven't given him that job because, he's the fastest guy, and he just needs like one crease to break one. And we addressed the offensive line situation a little bit earlier. Definitely hurts the depth, no question about it. But you prepare all off season long for situations like this. So hopefully they'll be able to get by.
Well, and I think, hold on, what question were we on again?
Oh, the last one was about offensive line and special teams.
Special teams.
Yeah.
Oh, special teams. I was going to talk about O-line, but special teams, it was cool to see Tia Savea get that block. And I can't believe it's been that long since the Wildcats have had a block punt. 2015.
Block field goal.
Block field goal.
7 years.
7 years.
Crazy.
7 years. Devontae Neal in 2015.
I don't know why they don't just put all the tallest guys on field goal block. Like Jason Harris, he's not playing. He's not getting snaps at defensive end. Can't he get out there and be that guy in the middle who jumps up and tries to block the field goals?
Yeah.
I've always thought too, like on really long field goals, put your tallest guy like right down by the goalpost and have him jump up and try to swat the ball.
Could you do that?
Of course. Why not? As long as you're in the field of play, sure.
Jason Harris does have a basketball background, so he can jump too.
Yeah. It's 10 feet.
Get T-Mac out there as well.
T-Mac, sure.
Man, I did not know you could do that.
Well, why couldn't you? Look, how did the kick six happen with Auburn and Alabama?
I'm like, isn't that goaltending?
Yeah, no, that's not how it works. The kick six with Auburn and Alabama, right? He's back there.
You can return it, but I didn't know you could like jump up and swat it.
As long I'm pretty sure that as long as you don't touch the goalpost itself, that it's not unlike blocking it anywhere else. You're on the field of play. But that would have to be a special circumstance, like a 55-yard field goal that's barely going to make it over the goalpost. It'd be very cool to see that, wouldn't it?
Calling goaltending on that. All right. I have more of a basketball question. Which past Sean Miller player would you have liked to see play in Tommy Lloyd's system?
Who sent that one in?
John Davis.
You can handle that one, Justin.
Lauri Markkanen.
Okay.
Lauri Markkanen, that 2016-17 team, because they were loaded. They had Kobe Simmons, who was a really athletic, kind of run and gun point guard. Alonzo Trier. And now, the thing about Tommy Lloyd's system is that you got to share the ball. Alonzo Trier was not really one to pass the ball a lot. That's why they called him ISO Zoe. But yeah, that 2016-17 team with Lauri Markkanen, all the different athletes they had would have been really fun. And also, man, that DeAndre Ayton team as well. How they would have done under Tommy Lloyd. But in terms of like specific players, definitely Lauri Markkanen, Aaron Gordon, those type of players, guys who were big time draft picks. All right,
Lowry, by the way, thriving with the Utah Jazz, who the Jazz were trying to tank this year, and those guys are playing too well. For the Jazz right now. So I don't know. Larry could get moved again if he keeps this up.
He's on the trade block
because he's outperforming expectations.
We got our sights on Victor Wembanyama, not Lauri Markkanen. All right, let's move on to the next question. Island Cat asked, did the decrease in the number of snaps by the upperclassmen on the D-line impact the play of the defense as much as the results seems to indicate?
Yeah, I talked about that earlier. I think absolutely. Not only that, but those young guys are very active, very aggressive. They make some mistakes. There was a very interesting sequence during the game, something kind of thing you don't catch in real time, but I was able to see it when I rewatched the game. Sterling Lane is in there, Justin, and they must have run 3 or 4 zone read plays like in a row at his side. And it's just like, you can just see he's confused. He doesn't know what, sometimes he gets caught inside. You're hesitant. Great, learning experience for him. And then there was one later where they handed off inside to Charbonnet and he ran down the line and made the tackle. great learning experience for these guys. They need to put on weight. I mean, Sterling Lane is not nearly as big as he needs to be. Russell Davis is not as big as he needs to be. Isaiah Ward, not as big as he needs to be. That's what the offseason is going to be for. As we mentioned, those defensive end spots are wide open heading into next year. So it's helping those young guys to get the experience, and it's helping the older guys to get more rest.
They're going to be putting in a lot of OT with TO.
They sure
this
are.
Offseason.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. Our next one, of the young faces who've been added to the defensive rotation, who has had significant impact? Who do you foresee seeing increased action these final 2 games? I really like the dollar package. I like the DBs coming out of it, especially Ephesians Prysock. I thought he had an okay game against UCLA. I've always wondered, with the new guys becoming more important with the defense, with a guy like Christian Roland Wallace, Jackson Turner, Christian Young, you don't know the future of those guys. Christian Young's going to be gone because he's out of eligibility, but would you maybe look for Takario Davis and Ephesians to step in and move CRW to safety for next season? So maybe they start to slowly implement Ephesians and Takario Bobo Davis more. I don't know, but as far as like freshmen who has had a significant impact, I probably would have to go more recently with Jacob Manu at linebacker. Especially that game against UCLA, the plays that he made for an undersized linebacker, I think is worth something to tip your cap towards. But I don't know. Who would you go with?
I just love that we can see the future on that side of the ball. The offense was the offensive off-season strategy was we need to fix this ASAP, right? So we're going to bring in Jacob Cowing, and we're going to bring in Jaden DeLora, and our offense is going to improve right away. And it did. Defense, it's been more of, it's taken time to develop these guys, get their bodies built up. A lot of the guys who are playing weren't here in spring. So maybe, that kind of pushes the timetable back a little bit. But, Takario Davis and Ephesians Prysock look like what you want, press corners to look like, right? Mm-hmm. They're both legit 6'3", 6'4", with movement skills and seem to have pretty natural football instincts. We've talked about Manu a lot. The defensive ends are very active. The defensive tackles, Jacob Kungaika and Tai Yungalele, look like they're going to be a great tandem here for the future. I like who's going to be the breakout star of them all. It's too early to say.
All right, our last question comes from Joseph52. With all due respect to players like JDL and Zero, and whenever someone starts out a sentence with all due respect, they're about to say something borderline disrespectful. But Joseph says, looking forward to next year, is it fair to say their spots, being Jaden DeLora and Christian Roland Wallace, are not guaranteed if they come back? They have been good this season, but if development with the freshmen go as planned, the starting cornerbacks should be Davis and Prysock. So this kind of goes along with what we were talking about.
No, I don't agree with this premise.
Yeah, well, Jaden DeLora, that's an interesting one because Noah Fafita is the future of the program, right? Does he get to a point where it's like, yeah, I don't mind being the backup quarterback for 2 years? Noah's a competitor, and Noah has looked good in the moments that he's played this year.
No one loves being a backup, but if Jaden DeLora is going to throw 30 touchdown passes this year and for 3,500 yards, and they're going to win 5 or 6 games, he's going to be the starting quarterback next year. Yeah, that's just the way it is. And we've talked about on the podcast before that, it's always a tricky situation with young touted quarterbacks. Only one guy can play at a time. So, you either have to be patient or you have to look for your next opportunity. But Jaden is going to be the starting quarterback at Arizona in 2023, barring an injury or something unforeseen. If Christian Roland Wallace decides to come back, he will be one of the 5 starting defensive backs for this team. Now, which position he would play, maybe there could be talk of moving him somewhere else. I think he'd be amazing at that star position, the one that Gunnar Maldonado is currently playing. But that's a sort of, hey, where did the scouts see him? What do you want? What do you want to do? Zero, because they're not just going to move him because they feel like it's the best for them. That's one where he's got a pro future, and they're going to want to have that discussion with him to see, hey, if the NFL scouts are looking at you at safety, do you want to move to safety, and play there and get that on film? So, I those guys are going to be starters if they're here next year.
Could JDL turn pro?
I mean, he could. There's a couple problems though. One is he's undersized. I mean, he's about 6 feet, and
I'm not making this comparison, but so is Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I mean, he's super. I mean, look, he's super fun to watch. He's got an exciting brand of play. He seems to be a great leader who's got a big personality, but none of that necessarily means that that's going to work in the NFL. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Kyler. So no, I don't think so. He's a third-year sophomore currently, so he could come back for 2 more years if he wanted to. But I would imagine that he's going to be here next year and want to have an even better year next year than he had this year.
All right, and that will do it for the mailbag portion of the Wildcast podcast. And on that note, that's also the end of the podcast as the episode wraps up here. We got, 36 minutes left. Good podcast. We appreciate all of those who have tuned in. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Wildcast podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, Pac-12 picks coming up on Thursday. I think we both had a pretty good week. This past week, very unusual for me. So I'm gonna try to build on that momentum.
The last month it's been very unusual for me too, my man. All right, don't forget, subscribe, rate, review the Wildcast. Download the Wildcaster app for free off the App Store and Google Play, and check out all work on Arizona Wildcats football on Tucson.com and the Wildcaster app. And hey, it's also college basketball season. Arizona has a game later on this week at home at McKale Center before they turn their attention to the Maui Invitational. Should be a good one. Bruce Pascoe gets to spend Thanksgiving in Hawaii. It's pretty cool.
It's not bad.
If you ask me.
There are worse places to be than Maui.
No doubt about that. All right. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate you.